Hi, here in Shenzhen, China, we are in a full lockdown situation. And in this video, I'm going to break down what that means, and I'm going to talk about the zero COVID policy of China. Hi, welcome back to the channel. If it's your first time here, my name is Lee. I run this channel with my son, Ollie. We create content in and around China. We do technical videos, we cover technology, we cover food and travel, and we do opinion pieces. So there's something for a mixed variety of people. So have a look. If you like what you see, consider subscribing. Okay, so lockdown here in Shenzhen. Over the last few weeks, there has been outbreaks of cases both here in Shenzhen and around China, and about a week ago those cases started increasing, and on the 15th across China we had a total of 3,290 cases in various areas. The most are in Jilin, Shanghai had a lot, and here in Shenzhen we had 86 cases. Now there'd already been quite extensive testing and a few restrictions applied in some areas, but the decision was taken to go into full lockdown here in Shenzhen on Monday. Now before I get fully into the details of these, I just want to sort of go over a few things, just to clarify some things. Now, when you see in Western media, similar to headlines like this one from the New York Times, lockdown spread in China as COVID cases surge in Shanghai and other areas. And what you have to remember is when they talk about COVID cases surging, as I said, we had just a little over 3,000 cases on the 15th of March. Now, you compare that on a similar day to Germany, which had 200,000 cases, and America, which had 50,000 cases. And what you've got to remember as well is that China has a population of 1.4 billion people. So in relative terms, this is a relatively small outbreak, but the government here still takes this very, very seriously. And so you need to really get things into context when you're talking about this. So, okay, so this lockdown now in Shenzhen, it's actually the first major lockdown we've had since the original lockdown just after the first outbreak in Wuhan. And actually, in some respects, it's a more severe lockdown this time. And pretty much everything has closed. So factories have closed. Even public transport has been shut down, which I don't believe was the case last time. Most people have been, are not allowed to leave their apartment complexes freely. In my apartment complex, we have 3 passes which allow us out every other day for a couple of hours to go to a supermarket. When I say everything's closed, supermarkets are still open, and things like pharmacies, anything that is essential is still open. And also online deliveries are still operating. So that's what we're doing. We actually have no real need to leave our apartment complex, to be honest. We can go out in the garden and treat area in the apartment complex and walk around if we need exercise, and we can obtain all our food which is delivered and left at the gate of the complex. So actually, there's no massive need for us to go outside of the apartment complex, if I'm being honest. Now, this lockdown has been mandated, say, for Monday, which was the 14th, and it's due to end on the 20th, so it's a week. But the authorities here in Shenzhen have said if the cases are not reducing by that time, then they will consider extending it. So it will be reviewed, I would imagine, on the 19th or the 20th, and we will know more news then. Now, what they're also doing, and this has been set up in my apartment complex, is over that the next sort of 7 days, we will need to have 3 compulsory coronavirus tests. And there's a team of people that are making sure everybody has their coronavirus test. I went to do mine today. It's a very simple process, took me about 15 minutes. The result will come through on my phone either later this evening or tomorrow morning. Now, moving on to other things. The West has been very critical of China's dynamic zero COVID policy. And there's been a lot of discussion about this in some foreign chat groups on WeChat. And I feel also that there are some Chinese who are getting a little bit frustrated with this. What you do have to remember, however, is pretty much for the last 2 years, we've been free to travel around China with fairly minimal restrictions. That has actually, restrictions has increased a little bit over the last month as cases have been popping up around China. And actually Oliver made a video about a circumstance he encountered while he was traveling to a particular province. And I'll leave a link to that video either here or here, whichever side it is. I always get it mixed up, but I will leave a link to that video. And it does highlight that some of the issues that can be encountered. However, the biggest problem, I think the biggest frustration for foreigners is that they can't travel in and out of China. And also I feel some Chinese are finding this also quite frustrating. You know, I haven't seen my family for 2.5 years and I really want to. My situation is somewhat also complicated because of my cancer treatment at the moment. Anyway, as I said, there's been a lot of discussion, and we have one friend in the group who has a close friend who's part of a policy think tank who advises the government on policy, and he's involved in policy on the dynamic zero COVID approach. So he was asked why that China are going along this route, and these are the answers he gave, which I'm going to read out now. So the first thing he says, the government needs its citizens' support, and the government are responsible for every person, and this is the principle. Besides, it's a way that confirms the legitimacy of governance. Now, this is something that the West probably won't understand. They'll think it's authoritarianism and it's just the Chinese government doing anything to stay in power. Well, that's not the case. I think the government really do consider the well-being of the people here and you know, act on that. And I feel, you know, this zero COVID strategy, if China had taken the same stance as the US or the UK, you know, the US has almost 1 million deaths from coronavirus, the UK over 150,000. Now, you also need to bear in mind that China have had around 5,000 or somewhat less than 5,000, and a majority of those were in the early days when there wasn't so much known about the virus, how to stop the spread and how to treat people who had the virus. So this is something you need to keep in mind. Now, if China would have adopted similar policies to the US, we could have been talking of upwards of 4 million deaths here in China, and that would be just not acceptable, not only for the government but also by the people. And the second thing he says is, if the virus is out of control, too many people would go to hospitals and make the system break up, so that we must control the number of infections. Now, this is again something we've seen in a lot of Western countries, and we've seen that in Hong Kong at the moment, where hospitals have become overloaded. You know, we had this happen in the NHS in the UK. It's also happened in the US. Now, in China, the major cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen have a very robust healthcare system. But in the more sort of lower level cities, the less developed cities and the rural areas, they really don't have the developed health infrastructure to deal with huge amount of patients. Hospitals here, even in the cities, are very busy places. You know, as I said, we're dealing with a population of 1.4 billion, and that's a lot of people. So I think, and as well on top of that, is Chinese tend to go to the hospitals even if they have a very, very minor ailment. And that's because they don't have a referral system like we do in the UK. Here, you go straight to a hospital. So hospitals are extremely busy, and they're very concerned that hospitals will become overstretched, and then people who genuinely need hospital treatment for emergencies or more severe things like maybe heart attacks or things like that would struggle to be able to get adequate treatment at the right time. So that's another thing that you need to remember. And thirdly, the more people that get an infection, the more possibility of being a mutation into a new variant. Nobody knows that it could be more deadly again after a new variant is mutated. So another worry, and this will obviously be looked at by the scientists and epidemiologists here, is that there's a concern that if it spreads and it mutates to a more virulent or more deadly strain, then we could be back to square one with a bigger problem on our hands. That could also be a problem because it could potentially spread outside of China too. And last and fourthly and last is the fear of the longer term side effects are still not clear. So again, there's just not enough data on the long term effects of catching coronavirus. And again, this is something that we are seeing in other countries, and I don't know much about this, but there's a lot of talk about people suffering from long COVID. So there are obviously long-term effects. So all this has to be weighed up, and I think this is why the Chinese government are continuing to pursue a zero COVID approach. And I think when data becomes available, or when they feel the time is right, they will start to relax that COVID approach. I do note that in some areas they started to introduce rapid antigen tests that people can use at home, and there also have been one or two small changes to the overall COVID policy. I won't go into that because I don't know all the details of that, but I do know there have been some small changes. Now, one other thing I want to talk about with this latest outbreak and lockdowns is that, as many of you will know, Shenzhen is a major hub for technology. There is a lot of tech development and manufacturing here in Shenzhen. And as all factories and ports and distribution centres have been shut down, even including Foxconn, Apple's contract manufacturer Foxconn, there will inevitably be a knock-on effect to global supply chains. And even though we might only be closed for a week or 10 days, even when those companies start production again and the ports open again, it will take a week or two for those operations to come back up to full capacity. So there could be a knock-on effect of 3 or 4 weeks on the global supply chain. Now, what that will do is it will ultimately potentially cause shortages in markets, and it will also potentially cause price rises through corporations and companies price gouging, which is inevitable when supply is short. Now, I hear much Western media criticising China's zero COVID approach, and I sometimes think they should be very careful what they wish for, because if China abandoned the zero COVID approach and the virus spread like I've just recently talked about in this video, there would be a lot of factories that would be severely affected because people wouldn't be able to go to work. There'd be lots and lots of disruptions to the global supply chain, and that would cause massive knock-on effects, because you may not only have those supply chains disrupted for a week or so, it could be months, and that would cause absolutely huge pressure to Western markets and the world global supply chains. So I really think you do very much need to be careful what you wish for in the West. You know, the last thing you want is more shocks to the global supply chain when much of the West is already got high inflation, and due to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, they're going to have even higher energy and inflation pressures coming down the pipeline over the next 6 to 12 months. So I think it's in the world's interests that the Chinese government pursue a zero COVID approach, although that is sometimes frustrating, you know, even for me to being a foreigner here. I'd love to be able to freely travel outside of China and back. I really miss my family. I have a granddaughter who's 1 year old I haven't even seen yet. I dearly miss my parents. I haven't seen them for 2.5 years. And, you know, my situation is somewhat complicated because of my cancer. Anyway, if you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. Due to the nature of what the West are doing at the moment, it seems that voices like ours are getting somewhat suppressed in the YouTube environment at the moment. I don't have concrete proof of that, but I just see our views over the last sort of month or two and how our video is getting distributed out there. So please give it a thumbs up, that does help. And also if you interact down in the comments, that also helps the YouTube algorithm. And it's also healthy to have a discussion going on down in the comments. I don't always respond to as many as I'd like to, but rest assured I do read all your comments, and it's really interesting. I get a lot of feedback about that, I learn, and that's what it's all about. And finally, if you do like this channel and you like the content we provide, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Anyway, as usual, my ending, as always, for now, take care.